water, earth, fire, air. If you grew up anywhere near this show, you can probably recite the rest of it without thinking. And that's sort of the point. Those opening lines arrive before the story starts, so nobody really examines them. But there's a lot packed in there. One person, all four elements, reborn forever, one at a time, for 10,000 years. That's a set of rules. And rules that big tend to bump into each other. So that's what tonight is. 11 of the strangest knots in the Avatar mythology, laid out one after another, in no particular order of importance. Not a plot hole hunt. I like this world far too much for that. These are the puzzles that have stayed interesting for 20 years, precisely because nobody ever tidied them up. Nothing later depends on anything earlier, so you can drift off wherever you like. If you're enjoying these, subscribing helps more than you'd think. And that's the only time I'll mention it. Right, let's start underneath everything else, with the question of who is actually being reborn. There's a line in Beginnings that I don't think gets nearly enough attention. After harmonic convergence, Rava, the great spirit of light, has already merged permanently with a man called One, and as he lies dying on the battlefield, she tells him, "We will be together for all of your lifetimes. Yours. Not, I'm going to give you lifetimes. Not, I'll carry you forward. Yours." As though One already had a queue of them stacked up, and Rava had simply booked a seat on all of them. That's a very small word doing a very large amount of work, and I've never been able to unhear it. Because it implies that everybody in this world reincarnates. Every farmer, every fisherman, every miserable Fire Nation clerk. The Avatar isn't special because they come back. The Avatar is special because they come back with a passenger, and the passenger keeps the receipts, which is a lovely idea, and the show never mentions it again. Not once. 10,000 years of spiritual lore, and the single biggest metaphysical claim in the whole franchise is a possessive pronoun in a flashback episode. Anyway, the mechanics, as canon actually gives them to us, go like this. In 9829 BG, during a harmonic convergence, One permanently fuses his spirit with Rava's, and that fusion is what we call the Avatar spirit. From then on, when an Avatar dies, Rava moves on to the next host. The order runs fire, air, water, earth, mirroring the order One himself learned the elements in, which is a genuinely nice bit of design. The cycle isn't some cosmic law handed down from on high, it's just the sequence one bloke happened to learn things in, frozen into place for 10 millennia, because nobody ever got round to changing it. Sort of like how a company's entire filing system is the way it is because someone in 1987 had a preference. But here's the knot. When the show says Aang and Roku are the same person, does it mean that? Because both readings are in there, and sometimes they're in the same episode. Roku talks to Aang about our shared past. It's my past and our shared past, ours. Korra walks into a room in the spirit world and recognises Iroh's teapot, a teapot she has categorically never seen, because One used it. That's continuity of memory. That's one life with a gap in the middle, and yet nobody in the show behaves as though these are the same person. Nobody looks at Korra and sees Kyoshi. Tenzin doesn't treat Korra as his father, wearing a new face which, let's be honest, would make their entire dynamic completely unwatchable. Katara, who is married to Aang for decades, becomes Korra's waterbending teacher, and there is not one moment where she treats that girl as her husband. Come back round again. The show is very careful about that, and it's right to be. So which is it? The tidier answer, the one most fans land on, is that Rava is the thread, and the person is new each time. Rava is the hard drive. The human being is whatever's plugged into it this decade. The past lives are accessible the way a library is accessible, not the way your own childhood is accessible. That works. It explains why Korra is nothing like Aang, why Kyoshi was nothing like Kuruk, why every avatar has to learn the same lessons from scratch, despite theoretically having 10,000 years of notes. Except it doesn't sit right with the way Roku speaks, or with the fact that one spirit specifically is described as merged into the thing, not just tagging along. One isn't the librarian, one is in the pile. And once you start pulling on that thread, you end up somewhere genuinely odd, which is, what would it even mean for Cora to be the same person as one? They share no memories she can reach, no body, no personality, no language probably. The only continuous thing between them is a spirit that neither of them can see, and both of them mostly experience as a feeling. It's the ship problem, isn't it? Replace every plank in a ship, and you've got a philosophical argument on your hands. Except here, they've replaced every plank, the hull, the sails, the crew, and the ocean, and kept the name. I don't think there's an answer. I've read a lot of very confident people insisting there is one, and they all quietly ignore the half of the evidence that inconveniences them. What I do think is that the ambiguity is load-bearing. It has to be. Think about what happens if you pin it down either way. Say the avatar is fully straightforwardly one every time. Then nothing anyone does matters much, because the being at the centre of the story is 10,000 years old and has already learned everything. Aang's growth becomes theatre. Korra's 4 seasons of getting it wrong become a very long amnesia plot. You've got a protagonist who is technically the most experienced person alive and is behaving like a teenager, and the only way to explain that is to say the experience is locked away, which is just the other reading wearing a hat. Now say the opposite. Say every avatar is a brand new person and the past lives are strangers. Then why consult them at all? Why does anyone trust them? The whole spiritual architecture of the franchise, the meditation, the visions, the guidance, becomes a seance with a very well-organised address book. The story needs both. It needs the weight of 10,000 years and the freshness of a 12-year-old. And the only way to have both is to never quite say which one you're holding. Here's the detail that gets me though, and it's the small one, as it usually is. Nobody in that world seems bothered by any of this. There are monks, there are sages, there are entire religious orders built around finding and training this person, 4 nations with 4 sets of traditions and presumably 4 sets of theologians, and in 113 episodes, across 2 series, plus novels, plus comics, I cannot think of a single scene where someone sits down and asks the question properly. Is the avatar the same soul or a new one? Nobody argues about it. Nobody splits into factions over it. There's no heresy, no schism, no bad-tempered scroll war between the Fire Sages and the Air Nomads about the nature of avatar continuity, which is either a small gap in the world building or an extremely accurate piece of world building, depending on how cynical you're feeling, because that is how actual religions tend to work. The central claim is often the fuzziest bit, and everyone gets on with the ceremonies regardless. Ask most people what exactly they think happens, and you get a shrug and a story about their grandmother. One more thing while we're here, because it's the sort of detail I find myself thinking about at 2 in the morning. If Rava carries the avatar forward, and Rava is a spirit of light and peace, then every avatar has a permanent bias baked into them. They're not neutral. They're constitutionally inclined towards one half of a cosmic pair. The show frames Rava as simply good, and Vaatu as simply bad. But the actual mechanic described in Beginnings is that the 2 of them are a balance, and neither can be permanently removed, which means the being tasked with keeping the world in balance is, structurally, on a side. I don't know what to do with that. I just think it's interesting, and I notice nobody in the show mentions it either. There's one more thing I keep circling, which is the question of what happens in the gap. An avatar dies, Rava moves to the next host, and the show is fairly clear that this happens at birth. One dies, Rava leaves his body, and a baby cries. Immediate handover. Except that isn't always possible, is it? The cycle is meant to run in a fixed elemental order, and the next avatar has to be born into a specific nation. So what happens if nobody in that nation happens to be being born at that exact instant? Does Rava wait? Does she hover somewhere, elemental order in hand, until a suitable candidate presents themselves? The show never says, and the more you poke at it, the odder it gets, because it means the identity of the most powerful person in the world is decided by obstetric timing. Somewhere out there is an avatar who got the job because they were the first child born in the Earth Kingdom on a particular Tuesday. I find that quite funny and also slightly horrifying, which is roughly my relationship with this entire franchise. But talking a bit about the practical end of all this, never mind who the avatar fundamentally is. Before any of that becomes anyone's problem, there's a much simpler question that has to be answered first. How does anybody actually find out? 4 toys on a table. That's it. That's the test. Thousands of toys, including 4 relics collected over centuries, are laid out in front of a small child, and whichever 4 he reaches for decide whether he's the most important person alive. Aang picks a turtle duck on wheels, a monkey with a drum, a wooden snake, and the little Damaroo rattle. And Monk Gyatso tells him those 4 objects belong to avatars past, and every avatar has picked them, and that's how they know. I've always liked that scene enormously, and also thought about it for slightly too long. Because the logic is circular in a way nobody addresses. The toys are avatar relics because previous avatars chose them. Previous avatars were identified as avatars because they chose the toys. At some point in the deep past, somebody put 4 objects on a table for the first time and had to decide on some other basis entirely, and that basis is never mentioned. It works though. It's beautiful. It's got that lovely Tibetan influence texture, and in Aang's case, it was correct. Now, Kyoshi. If you've only watched the shows, Kyoshi is the tall one with the fans who says the thing about not being kind. If you've read the novels, she is something else entirely, and her identification story quietly takes the toy test out behind the bike sheds. Here's what happens. Kuruk dies. The search begins for the next avatar, who will be an earthbender, and the search goes badly. Not badly as in a few false starts, badly as in 7 years of nothing, 9 years with no avatar in the world, and no idea where one might be. Then they find a boy called Yun. Charming, capable, exactly what you'd want. He is declared the avatar, publicly, formally. He's given a mansion, tutors, a fire-bending master, the whole apparatus. The 4 nations breathe out. Order restored. And he isn't the avatar. He's simply a very good earthbender who was in the wrong place when a lot of powerful people badly needed a result. The real avatar is Kyoshi, who at that point is essentially staff. She works in the house. She is Yun's friend and servant. Nobody looks at her twice until she's 16 and bends an element she has absolutely no business bending in front of witnesses at the South Pole. 16 years. The avatar was in the building, doing the washing up, and I want to be clear about how much that breaks. The test didn't simply fail, it failed and produced a confident false positive, which is considerably worse than producing nothing at all. Everyone involved acted on the wrong answer for years. Resources were spent, decisions were made, a boy's entire sense of himself was constructed on top of it. What happens to Yun after is one of the genuinely upsetting threads in the expanded material, and I'm not going to spoil the shape of it here because it deserves the room. But sit with the ordinary human version for a second. Imagine being told from childhood that you are the reason the world holds together, building every part of yourself around that, and then being told calmly by adults that there's been a mix-up, no notes, absolutely devastating. Then you've got Korra, who is the exact opposite failure mode, in that there was no failure at all and also no test. She's 4 years old. She's in a room with senior members of the White Lotus, and she simply announces it. I'm the avatar, you gotta deal with it. Then she bends earth, fire and water in a single tantrum, in front of people who have spent their entire adult lives preparing to search for exactly this. No relics, no toys, no years of trekking round the poles, asking about unusual children. She saved everyone the trouble by being 4 and extremely loud about it. Which, if you think about it, rather suggests the tests were never necessary. They were traditional. Because the actual reliable indicator has always been sitting right there. The avatar can bend more than one element, and nobody else can. Full stop. That's not a subtle spiritual signifier requiring interpretation by trained monks. That's a party trick you cannot fake. So why the toys? Partly because you'd rather find them at 2 than at 16, and a toddler isn't going to firebend on request. Fair enough. But partly, I suspect, for a less comfortable reason. Whoever controls the identification controls the avatar. Look at how it actually plays out across the franchise. The Fire Sages knew Roku was the avatar, and crucially, so did the Fire Lord's family, which is how a young Roku ends up as best friends with a crown prince. Aang finds out early, and it's presented as a betrayal of air nomad custom. The monks broke their own tradition and told him years ahead of schedule because they were frightened of what was coming. Korra is identified at 4 and then functionally taken into custody. Lovely compound in the South Pole, high walls, guards, tutors, no friends her own age, no leaving. For her own protection, obviously. That's a childhood spent under supervision by an organisation that answers to nobody in particular. And when she finally leaves, she does it by climbing a fence. The identification isn't a spiritual event, it's an administrative one, and administration has owners. Yun's case makes that painfully clear, because the pressure to produce an avatar was political long before it was spiritual. 9 years without an identified avatar is 9 years of trade disputes and territorial nonsense with no arbiter. Somebody wanted a name to announce. They got one. There's one more wrinkle I like, and it's a quiet one. In the gap between an avatar dying and the next one being found, the world has to just get on with it. Kuruk dies and the next avatar is born the same year. Roku dies and the air nomads are told the next avatar will be born among them, which they know because the cycle is public information, which is itself a fascinating vulnerability we'll get to later. But during those gaps, the avatar exists. There's a child out there, somewhere, bending the wrong element in front of a startled parent. The world just doesn't know where. And the searching is done by people on foot, on bison, on boats, asking villages whether anyone's noticed anything odd about a toddler. It's the least mystical process imaginable. For all the glowing eyes and cosmic reincarnation, the machinery of finding the avatar is basically a very slow missing persons enquiry, conducted by monks. I find that oddly charming. The universe hands the world its most powerful being and then offers no forwarding address, which raises a thought I've never been able to shake, and it's the sort of thing that gets more unsettling the longer you leave it out on the side. Over 10,000 years, statistically, some of them were never found. That has to be true. The identification process is a slow, manual, error-prone search conducted by monks on foot across 4 continents, and it produced a 9-year gap and a false positive within the one case we get to see in detail. Extend that failure rate backwards across 100-odd incarnations, and there is simply no version of the maths where every single avatar was located, informed, and trained. So somewhere back there are people who lived and died as the avatar without ever knowing. And what would that even look like from the inside? You'd be a bender with an odd knack. You'd occasionally do something you couldn't explain and put it down to a good day. If you were lucky, you'd be regarded as unusually gifted. If you were unlucky, you'd be regarded as unnatural in a village that didn't have a word for what you were, because the avatar has to be told. That's the bit. Multiple element bending doesn't come automatically. The avatar learns each element from a teacher, in sequence, the same as anybody else. Without the training and without the knowledge, an unidentified avatar is just a very talented waterbender with strange dreams. The show gestures at this once briefly in the Southern Water Tribe. The Fire Nation spent a century raiding the South specifically to remove waterbenders, and Katara grows up as the only one left, self-taught, working from a scroll. If the cycle had happened to land there in the wrong decade, that's exactly the shape it would have taken. An avatar who never found out, in a village with nobody left to teach them anything. Nobody in the franchise says that out loud, and I'm quite glad they don't, because it's the sort of thought best left as a thought. There's a related wrinkle in when they get told to, which the show treats as a serious breach, and modern viewers tend to skim past. Air Nomad tradition holds that the avatar isn't informed until they're 16. The reasoning is presumably sound. Let the child have a childhood, let them develop as a person before you hand them the world. Roku, over in the Fire Nation, gets told on his 16th birthday, and that's presented as the correct and proper way of doing it. Aang was told at 12. The monks broke a rule that had stood for a very long time, because a war was coming and they were frightened, and that decision, made by people who loved him, for reasons that were entirely defensible, is the first domino in everything that follows. It's a small thing, 4 years, but it's the difference between a boy who knows who he is and a boy who's just been told his life belongs to somebody else and is about to be moved away from the only adult who treats him as a child. Korra, meanwhile, is identified at 4 and raised inside the knowledge from the start, and the result is a young woman with enormous confidence in the office and almost no idea who she is outside it, which is arguably the opposite failure. There's no good age to tell someone. That's the actual finding here. Tell them early and you erase the person. Tell them late and you hand a fully formed adult a life that was never theirs to plan. Right, since we're on the subject of that power, once you've found them, the training is, arguably, the straightforward part. 4 elements, 4 teachers, a lot of falling over. The genuinely strange bit is the state that makes an avatar in the first place. Glowing eyes, no pupils, tattoos lit up like something's plugged in behind them. Everyone knows the look. What's less commonly discussed is what the state actually is, mechanically, and why it's the single, strangest piece of design in the whole system. Here's the description the show gives us. In the avatar state, the avatar channels the skill and experience of every previous incarnation at once. Not their advice, their capability. 10,000 years of accumulated muscle memory arriving in one body simultaneously. That's why Aang, a 12-year-old with about 4 months of waterbending under his belt, can fuse with the ocean spirit and dismantle an entire Fire Nation naval siege. He isn't doing it. Everyone is doing it, through him. And it's presented as a defense mechanism. It triggers automatically when the avatar is in mortal danger or in extreme emotional distress, which in Aang's case is roughly the same thing. The body's own alarm system, threaten the avatar, and 10,000 years of dead people turn up to sort it out. Fine. Lovely. Now here's the rule that sits on top of it, and it's delivered right at the start of Book 2 by Roku in an episode literally called The Avatar State. If the avatar is killed while in the avatar state, the reincarnation cycle ends. Not resets, not skips a generation. Ends. Permanently. No more avatar ever for anyone. And I want to sit on that for a moment because of how badly it fits together with everything else. The avatar state is the only moment the avatar is genuinely untouchable, and it is simultaneously the only moment the avatar can be killed in a way that actually matters. Every other death is a delay. Kill an avatar in the street, and you've inconvenienced the cosmos, by about 16 years. Kill one mid-glow and you've deleted the position. Power and vulnerability aren't opposites here. They're the same switch. The Korra series does eventually explain the mechanism, and I'll give it credit, it's an elegant patch. In the Avatar state, Rava isn't just present, she's fully manifested and exposed, front of house. So killing the Avatar in that moment kills the spirit as well, and the spirit is the thread. It's a genuinely satisfying retrofit for a rule that had been floating around unexplained since 2005, but the patch doesn't fix the design problem. It explains it. The safety mechanism still activates precisely at the moment when activating it makes the stakes apocalyptic. Think about the actual sequence. Avatar is in danger. Danger is severe enough to trigger the automatic response. The automatic response makes the Avatar immensely powerful and simultaneously converts a survivable situation into a permanent one. It's an airbag that deploys by turning the car into a bomb, and General Fong works this out in about a week. That's the bit of the episode I keep coming back to. Fong is a minor character, one appearance. He's not a genius, he's a frustrated Earth Kingdom commander who has watched too many soldiers come back in pieces, and he identifies the exploit immediately. The Avatar state triggers when Aang is in danger, or when someone Aang loves is in danger. So threaten Katara, he's completely wrong. Morally, he's also completely right. Technically, it works. Aang goes off like a bomb and levels the base. What I find uncomfortable about that episode, and I think it's meant to be uncomfortable, is that Fong's argument isn't stupid. He takes Aang to the infirmary. He points at the beds. He says people are dying every day, right now, and you could stop it. And the show doesn't give him a straw man rebuttal. It just demonstrates that the tool he wants to use doesn't work the way he thinks. Because the Avatar in that state isn't in control of anything. Katara's the one who names it properly. She says the Avatar state seems to put Aang in a state of rage and pain, which reframes the whole thing. It isn't a power-up, it's a scream. There's a further wrinkle that the show is quietly honest about, and most fans skate past. Roku, who delivers the warning, also admits he struggled with the state, not once. He tried and failed to master it, and says so plainly, specifically to make Aang feel less useless about his own failures with the Guru. So the most dangerous, most important, most defining ability the Avatar has is one that even the Avatars find unreliable. Kiyoshi's relationship with it in the novels is its own kind of frightening. Korra spends a chunk of her first 2 seasons treating it as a hammer. Nobody gets a manual. Every single one of them has to work it out from scratch, with a warning attached that says, "Get this wrong at the wrong moment, and there is never another one of you." Which brings me to the thing I actually think is the paradox here. Underneath all the mechanics, the Avatar state is described as the moment the Avatar is most fully themselves, every incarnation present, the whole 10,000 years in one place. And it's also the moment they have the least agency they will ever have. They don't choose the targets, they frequently don't remember it afterwards. Aang wakes up from it horrified at what he's seen his own body do. So the state where you are most completely the Avatar is the state where you are least completely a person. I don't think the show ever resolves that, and I don't think it wants to. It's the whole tension of Aang's arc in one mechanic. The job is bigger than the boy, and the closer he gets to doing the job properly, the less of the boy there is. Now here's the part that turns all of this from a design curiosity into something genuinely alarming, and it happens 2 series later. The rule is public. Not carefully guarded secret law known only to sages. Public enough that a group of anarchists in Korra's era build an entire multi-year operation around it. The Red Lotus don't want to kill the Avatar. Killing the Avatar achieves nothing, and they know it. They want to kill the Avatar in the Avatar state, because they've read the same material everyone else has and understood that this is the only lever that does anything permanent. Which is why their plan isn't an ambush, it's poison. Specifically, a metallic poison designed to force her into the avatar state involuntarily, to trigger the automatic defense response deliberately, so that the mechanism that exists to protect her delivers her, glowing, into exactly the position they need. That's the cleverest villain plan in either series, and it's built entirely out of the show's own stated mechanics. They didn't find a flaw in the lore, they read the manual, and it very nearly works. The reason it doesn't is not that the plan was flawed, it's that other people turned up. There's a smaller thing worth mentioning here too, which is that the state isn't binary, quite. By the very end of the original series, Aang is in it and in control, eyes lit, still himself, choosing his targets, choosing when to stop. That's a different thing entirely from the screaming version, and it's presented as the actual mastery he'd been failing to achieve for 2 seasons, not switching it off, being present inside it, which is a lovely resolution, and it also quietly means the danger never goes away. A mastered avatar state is still a manifested avatar state. Control doesn't reduce the exposure, it just means you chose to be exposed. One last thought on this one, and it's the one that genuinely unsettles me. We're told the avatar state channels the skill of every past life, their capability arriving at once. Are they aware of it? Because there are 2 ways to read that. Either it's a stored library of technique being drawn on automatically, like a reflex, in which case fine, or the past lives are in some sense present and participating, in which case every time an avatar goes into that state, 10,000 people wake up briefly inside somebody else's body and then go back to sleep. The show gives us one image that leans towards the second reading, the wall of glowing avatars stretching backwards behind whoever's currently in the state, all moving together. That's a visual metaphor, obviously, but it's a strange metaphor to reach for. If the intended answer is it's just muscle memory. The other thing you notice once you start counting is how rarely it actually gets used. Across 61 episodes of the original show, full uncontrolled avatar state appearances are countable on 2 hands. That's remarkable restraint for a series whose protagonist has access to a nuclear option. And the reason is structural. Every time it comes out, the story has to be about the cost of it afterwards. Aang levels a Fire Nation base and spends the rest of the episode horrified. He fuses with the ocean spirit and destroys an entire fleet, and the show cuts to the aftermath rather than the victory. The state is never a triumph. It's always a bill anyway. Here's what makes all of it stranger. Aang does die in the avatar state, not on screen, in front of everyone, and the cycle carries on. Katara catching him. That's the image, isn't it? Green crystal light everywhere, Azula's bolt still hanging in the air somehow, and a 12-year-old going limp in a girl's arms with smoke coming off his back. It's the last 20 seconds of Book 2, and it's still, for my money, the most shocking thing either series ever did. Not because a character dies, kids' shows kill characters. Because of what the show had spent a whole season telling us that particular death would mean. Because Aang is in the avatar state when it happens. He's rising into it, eyes going white, and Azula puts lightning through his back at exactly the wrong moment. Which, by the show's own rule, established in the season opener, 20 episodes earlier, should be the end. Not the end of Aang. The end of the Avatar. Katara has spirit water. She's had it since the North Pole, since Book 1. A little vial from the Spirit Oasis, given to her by Pakku, set up an entire season in advance. It's good writing, and it is also, let's be honest, the only reason this franchise still exists. She uses it, he breathes. So where's the paradox in that? It isn't, he came back to life exactly. Plenty of stories do that. The paradox is in the specific wording of the rule, which is not the avatar dies and cannot be revived. It's the cycle ends. Those are very different claims. One is about a body, The other is about a cosmic system with 10,000 years of momentum behind it. So either Aang didn't fully die and the rule was never tested, or he did, and Ends turns out to be considerably softer than advertised. The show, characteristically, wants both readings available and refuses to pick. There's a piece of tie-in material that muddies it further, in the best way. A short animated comic covering what happened to Aang's spirit during those few weeks he spent unconscious. And what happens is that he's stuck in the spirit world, and Princess Yue finds him, and she tells him something quite alarming. He has to reconnect with 4 of his past lives, or the cycle will end. Which means the cycle was, for 3 weeks, in a suspended state. Not broken, not fine, hanging. And the thing keeping it from collapsing was a 12-year-old wandering around the spirit world, unaware he was doing anything important. Going to see Roku about his feelings. I love that. It's such a strange thing to leave in a side project. The single most consequential 3 weeks in the entire franchise happens in a 5-minute animated short that a substantial chunk of the audience has never seen. There were consequences though, real ones, and the show is disciplined about them. Aang comes back with a scar, not a metaphorical one, a starburst of dead tissue across his back where the bolts went in. And his connection to the Avatar state is severed, blocked. He can't reach it. Not because he's frightened of it, though he is, but because the injury sits directly on top of a chakra he'd opened with the Guru shortly before, and the damage closed it again. He doesn't get it back until the very last stretch of the finale, and when he does, it's because a rock hits him in exactly the right place, which is either an enormous coincidence or a joke about how this stuff works, and I genuinely cannot tell which. But here's the thread nobody pulls hard enough, and it's the one that's grown on me over the years. The entire world spends most of a season believing the Avatar is dead. Azula lets Zuko take the credit. The Fire Nation celebrates. The news goes everywhere. Ba Sing Se has fallen, the war is effectively over, and the Avatar is gone. And nobody, not one character on screen, draws the obvious conclusion. Because the world knows the rules. The cycle is not secret information. If the Avatar dies normally, a new one is born immediately into the water tribes, and in 12 or 16 years, there's a fresh one. That's the deal. That's the thing that has always made the Avatar unkillable as an institution. But everyone also knows Aang was fighting when he died. In the Avatar state, presumably, because that's what the Avatar does when cornered. Which means half the world should be quietly terrified that the cycle has just ended forever. And the other half, the Fire Nation half, should be having the largest party in recorded history, because that was the actual goal. Not killing a boy, killing the office. Instead, the show treats it as a tactical advantage. Soccer calls it their ace in the hole, which it is. It's excellent strategy, and it makes complete sense from inside the group. But the world outside them should be having a spiritual crisis of a scale we simply never see. And the show gives us maybe 2 lines about it. There's no panic in the water tribes, waiting for a birth that may never come. No Fire Nation theologians publishing on whether the era of the Avatar has closed. Nothing. It's the one bit of Book 3 I'd genuinely change. Not because it's a mistake exactly, because there was something enormous sitting right there, and the show walked past it to get to a beach episode, which, to be fair, is a very good beach episode. There's one more piece of this I think about a lot, and it's the choice the same episode puts directly in front of Katara about 15 minutes earlier. She's in the catacombs with Zuko. He's talking properly for the first time, about his mother, about the scar, about what was done to him, and she offers to use the spirit water on his face, the one vial, the thing she's been carrying across the world since the spirit oasis, and she offers it to heal a burn, because a boy in a cave told her something true about himself. Then Aang and Iroh come through the wall, Zuko makes his choice to join Azula, and the moment closes. So the entire continuation of the Avatar cycle, 10,000 years of it, rests on the fact that a conversation got interrupted at a particular second. If Iroh had been 30 seconds slower, Zuko's scar is gone, the vial is empty, and when Azula's lightning lands, there is nothing in Katara's belt but water. The show never underlines this. Nobody says it afterwards. Katara doesn't have a scene where she realises how close that was, and I've always found the restraint slightly maddening and completely correct at the same time. And the thing is, Azula suspects. That's the detail people miss on a first watch. She hands the credit to Zuko rather than taking it herself, and her reasoning is explicitly hedged. If the Avatar turns out to be alive, it's Zuko who failed, not her. She was in the room. She saw the girl with the water. She is the only person in the Fire Nation running the correct probability, which means the one person on the planet who has correctly worked out that the cycle might still be intact is the person who nearly ended it. What I'll say for that whole sequence, though, is that it's the moment the franchise stops being a children's adventure show and becomes something else. Book 1 ends on a triumph. Book 2 ends with the good guys losing completely, a city falling, and a 12-year-old dying on screen in his friend's arms. They aired that on Nickelodeon in 2006, and the reason it works is precisely because the rule was established 20 episodes earlier and stated plainly, so the audience does the maths in real time. You don't need a character to explain what's just happened. You've been carrying the information since the season opener, and it goes off on its own. That's very good construction. It's also the reason the rule's apparent flexibility afterwards bothers people so much. You can't set something up that carefully and then be casual about the follow-through without somebody noticing, and that's not even the longest stretch where the world went without. There's a much bigger gap earlier, a full century of it, and the reason for that one is asleep in a block of ice. A boy in a bubble of his own air, at the bottom of the sea, glowing faintly. For 100 years. It's such a good image that I think it stops people from examining it. It has the shape of a fairy tale, the sleeper under the hill, the king who'll return when the country needs him. And the show leans into that, right down to Katara cracking the ice open with a club and light pouring up into the sky like a flare. The mechanics are simple enough. Aang runs away from the temple. Storm catches him and Appa over open water. They go under and the Avatar state kicks in. That same automatic response we've already talked about, freezing the water around them and preserving them both. He doesn't age, he doesn't dream, as far as we know, he just stops. Here's the thing that took me embarrassingly long to notice. Because he was alive, no replacement was ever born. That's the whole knot, and it's beautifully quiet. The cycle only advances on death. Aang didn't die, so for 100 years the world had an avatar and had no avatar simultaneously, and there was nothing anyone could have done about it. Every monk searching the water tribes for a glowing toddler was looking for someone who did not exist, and could not exist because the position was occupied by a 12-year-old at the bottom of the ocean. The world wasn't waiting for a new avatar, it was waiting for that one, and it didn't know it. Now run the counterfactual, because the show never quite does it out loud, even though the entire emotional engine of the series is built on it. If Aang had drowned that night, properly drowned, not in the avatar state, just a frightened boy and a storm, the cycle continues. A waterbending avatar is born within the year. By the time Sozin's forces are really moving, that child is a teenager. By mid-century, there's a fully trained adult avatar in the world, with 100 years of war still to go. The Fire Nation might still have won. Plenty of avatars have lost things, but there would have been someone in the chair. So Aang's running away didn't delay the avatar. It removed the office for 4 generations. And what's quietly devastating is that Aang's guilt is never framed that way. He feels it personally. I wasn't there. My friends died. Gyatso died. I should have been at the temple. That's the version he can carry because it's about people he knew. The structural version is much worse, and I don't think he ever fully articulates it, possibly because articulating it would finish him off. There's a lovely bit of the show's honesty here too, which is that the monks were partly responsible. They told him he was the Avatar 4 years early because they were frightened of the war coming. They were going to separate him from Gyatso, the one adult who treated him like a child rather than an institution. A 12-year-old informed his childhood is over, being moved away from the only person who made it bearable. Of course he ran. Anyone would run. The most consequential decision in 10,000 years of world history was made by a scared kid, at night, without a plan. And it was in some sense a completely reasonable reaction to how the adults were behaving. Then there's the biology, which is its own small cruelty. He goes into the ice at 12. He comes out at 12, 100 years pass and he doesn't gain a day. And then he dies at 66, which for an Avatar is young. The shortened lifespan attributed directly to the century in the iceberg. Whatever the ice did to preserve him, it took payment at the other end. So the 100 years cost him twice, once by taking almost everyone he'd ever known, and once by taking the years off the back of his own life. He didn't skip a century. He was charged for it. And 165 is the number you'll see written down as his age, which is technically true and completely misleading. And I've always found that a strangely poignant piece of arithmetic. The record says he lived a long time. He lived 66 years. One more oddity, and it's the one I find genuinely hard to explain away. Why did nobody conclude the cycle had ended? Think about it from inside that world. The Avatar vanishes. Every air nomad is killed shortly afterwards, which is a public and extremely well-advertised fact. Then decade after decade goes by with no sign of anyone. No child bending two elements. And yet there were rumours, nothing. At what point do you stop looking? 20 years? 50? At some stage, the reasonable conclusion available to a thoughtful person in that world is that the Avatar died in the Avatar state during the comet, along with everyone else, and the cycle is simply over. And yet the show gives us a world that still talks about the Avatar as a live proposition. Zuko is hunting one. Zhao believes in one. Villages have legends and shrines and expectations. 100 years of total silence, and the institution's reputation is somehow intact. I don't think it's a mistake, mind. I think it's what actually happens with big beliefs. They don't get disproved, they just get quieter. And then somebody finds a buoy in the ice, and the whole thing switches back on like it never stopped. Still, 100 years is a long time to keep the lights on for someone who isn't coming, and there's a second load he's carrying out of that iceberg that has nothing to do with the Avatar at all, which the show handles beautifully and almost never states directly. He is the entire air nomad civilization. Not the last survivor of it. The whole thing. Every custom, every game, every recipe, every prayer, the correct way to make a pie, the rules of a sport nobody else has ever played, the philosophy, the jokes, the specific way the monks used to wind each other up. If Aang doesn't remember it, it did not happen, and it will never happen again. That is an enormous amount of pressure to put on a 12-year-old, and it sits in direct tension with the job. Because the Avatar is meant to belong to nobody. Spirit of no nation, as the phrasing goes in the novels. The Avatar is supposed to transcend the culture they were born into. Aang cannot do that. Aang is the culture. If he sets it down to be impartial, it's gone. So he's asked to be both the sole custodian of one people and the servant of all four, and those two roles pull in opposite directions constantly. You can watch it play out in almost every episode, where his vegetarianism, or his pacifism, or his refusal to fight in a particular way, gets in the way of the practical thing the world needs from him. The show's answer, eventually, is the one Yang Chen gives him, and we'll come to her later. It isn't a comfortable answer. The bit that gets me, though, is smaller and sillier. He teaches people airbending games. He builds a scooter. He reintroduces a 112-year-old king to a sport and gets a village to play it, and it's presented as a light episode about a boy being a boy. It's also a man archiving a dead civilization the only way he knows how, which is by getting other people to play it so it exists in more than one head. Appa, incidentally, comes out of that ice too, and is in exactly the same position. The last of the sky bison as far as anyone knows, preserved by the same event, carrying his own extinct species around on his back. The show gives him an entire episode of trauma about it, and I still find that a remarkably generous thing to do for a flying cow. One small mercy in all of it, and it's the thing the show does best. He isn't bitter about the century. Not really. He's grieving constantly in the background of every episode, but the character that comes out of that ice is fundamentally delighted by the world. That's not naivety. That's a choice made repeatedly by someone who has every reason to make the other one. And I think it's why the show holds up for adults. The optimism isn't the absence of the awful thing, it's a response to it. And there's a version of the 100 years that I think gets overlooked, which is what it did to everyone else's sense of time. The war lasts a century. That's 4 generations who have never known anything else. Katara and Sokka are born into it. Their parents were born into it. Their grandmother remembers a world before, but only just. Nobody alive at the start of the series has any adult memory of peace. So when Aang turns up, he isn't just the Avatar returning. He's the only living person who remembers what the world looked like before, and he remembers it as a child remembers things, vividly, warmly, and with no political context whatsoever. He's a witness to a world nobody else can verify, which is a strange kind of authority to carry around. Everyone believes him because there's no one to contradict him, and he's describing a place he last saw when he was 12. But there's a man who spent that same century operating on the opposite assumption, who looked at the Avatar cycle and concluded with total confidence that he could end it by hand. The decision, stated as plainly as it deserves, wipe out an entire people in order to prevent one person from surviving. That's the air nomad genocide. That's the reasoning behind it. Roku dies, the cycle says the next Avatar will be born among the air nomads. So Fire Lord Sozin waits for the comet and removes the air nomads from the board. It is the darkest thing in the franchise, and the show, to its enormous credit, never softens it. Aang walks into the Southern Air Temple and finds Gyatso's skeleton surrounded by Fire Nation armour, which is a detail I still think is astonishing to have put in a Nickelodeon cartoon. But here's what I want to actually look at tonight, because it's rarely discussed and it's genuinely strange. The plan doesn't work. It never could have. And it fails on its own stated terms, immediately, on day 1. Start with the timing. Sozin's comet arrives, the temples burn, the air nomads are killed. But the Avatar had already been born. Aang was 12 years old at that point. He'd been alive for over a decade. Whatever Sozin thought he was preventing had already happened before he lit the first fire. You cannot prevent a birth by killing the people afterwards. The genocide was aimed at a target that had already left. Now you could say Sozin's actual plan was to kill Aang specifically, and the mass killing was just a very thorough method of finding him. That's more coherent, and it's probably closer to what's in the man's head. But it's not what the strategy accomplishes, and it's not how the show frames it either. The framing is explicitly about the cycle. So take it at face value and follow it through. Say Sozin succeeds completely. Say his forces find Aang at the temple and kill him where he stands. A 12-year-old with no combat experience, not in the Avatar state, just a boy caught out. What happens? The cycle advances. A waterbending Avatar is born that year in the northern or southern water tribe. That's it. That's the entire result of the plan working perfectly. You've bought yourself 16 years and created a brand new Avatar who will grow up in a world where everybody knows exactly what the Fire Nation did and precisely why. You haven't ended anything. You've reset a timer and handed your enemies the best recruitment story in history. The only version of this that actually ends the cycle is killing the Avatar in the Avatar state, which we've covered, and which is essentially unplannable. It requires the Avatar to be at their most dangerous, and it requires you to land a killing blow in that specific window. Azula manages it 100 years later by pure opportunism, in a cave, against a boy who is mid-transition, and even then it doesn't take. That's not strategy. That's a lottery ticket, which leads somewhere quite bleak, and I've gone back and forth on it. The genocide didn't fail as a policy because it wasn't really a policy. It was a decision made in 1 week by a man who had just been humiliated, and then 100 years of institutional momentum on top of it. Nobody re-examined it. Nobody sat down in year 40 and said, hang on, what exactly is this achieving? The air nomads were already gone. The war just carried on because wars do, and the original justification quietly stopped mattering to anyone except the historians. Sozin himself lived to 102 and died, by his own account in his diaries, still waiting, still expecting the Avatar to turn up. He knew the plan hadn't worked. He just had no mechanism for stopping. Now the other half of this, which is the part everyone remembers, and I'll keep it brief because the Avatar and the Fire Lord does it better than I can. They were friends. Roku and Sozin. Same birthday, grew up together. One becomes Fire Lord and one becomes the Avatar, and for a while they genuinely make that work. Sozin is at Roku's wedding. Sozin gives him a headpiece, and when Roku finally confronts him, after Sozin has started expanding into the Earth Kingdom, after the argument, after the fight, Roku has him beaten and doesn't finish it. He spares him. He says something about being friends once and walks away. Then years later, the volcano erupts on Roku's island, and Sozin comes to help, and does help, right up until the moment he calculates that a world without Roku is a world he can have. And he leaves him in the ash. I've seen people call Roku's mercy the mistake that caused everything, and I understand the argument, but I don't think that's what the episode is doing. Because the whole reason that episode exists is Zuko. It's shown to him. He's being handed the story of an ancestor who chose ambition over a friend, and simultaneously the story of an ancestor who chose a friend over the safe outcome, because Roku is Zuko's great-grandfather too, on his mother's side, which is a fact the show drops with almost no ceremony, and which reframes everything. So the point isn't that Mercy failed. The point is that Zuko has both men in him and gets to choose. What I do think is fair to say is this: Roku's mercy is the last moment where any of it was one man's decision. After that, it becomes a machine, and the machine ran for a century on reasoning that had stopped making sense in its first fortnight. And there's a coda to it that I don't think gets discussed nearly enough, because the same broken reasoning gets used a second time, a century later, on a different people, and this time we watch the aftermath directly. The Fire Nation raids the Southern Water Tribe, repeatedly, over decades, and the specific objective of those raids is the removal of waterbenders. They come in, they take the benders, they leave. By the time we meet Katara, she is the only one left in the entire southern half of the world, and her grandmother has watched the whole thing happen. Now think about why they do that, in the context of an ongoing hunt for the Avatar. If your working assumption is that the Avatar might be dead, then the cycle has moved on, and the next Avatar is a waterbender. So you go and remove the waterbenders. It is the same plan. It's Sozin's plan, run again, on a smaller scale, with exactly the same logical hole in it. You cannot prevent a birth that may already have happened, and if you do succeed in killing the right person, you simply advance the cycle to the Earth Kingdom, which is enormous and which you are already at war with, except this time we get to see the cost close up, in one family, over 3 generations. Katara's mother dies during one of those raids, protecting a daughter who is actually the target. Harma gets taken and spends decades in a prison built specifically for waterbenders, and comes out of it having invented something appalling. That's the actual output of the strategy, Not a broken cycle, a ruined tribe, and a woman who learned to bend the water inside people because she had nothing else in that cell to work with. I think that's the most honest thing the show does with the whole business. It doesn't argue that the genocide was strategically foolish, though it plainly was. It just shows you patiently, across 2 series, what happens to the people underneath it, and lets you notice on your own that none of it ever got anybody anything. Sosin's own account of it, incidentally, survives. He kept diaries and Zuko ends up reading them, and what's in them is not the confession of a monster who understood himself. It's the record of a man who found a justification early. The Fire Nation is prosperous, so we should share our prosperity, and never revisited it right through to a very old age, spent still expecting the Avatar to walk through the door, which is the most ordinary kind of evil there is, and the hardest to write convincingly. He doesn't cackle. He rationalizes once and then simply doesn't stop. The other thing worth naming is that the whole plan depended on public information. The cycle order isn't secret. Fire, air, water, earth, everyone knows it. It's taught, it's assumed, it's the basis on which the search parties get dispatched, which means the Avatar's greatest institutional strength. You cannot kill the office, it simply relocates, comes bundled with a permanent weakness. Everyone always knows the postcode of the next one. No other position works like that. You cannot know which family the next Fire Lord will be born into if you kill the current one hard enough. But you can always know precisely which of the 4 nations is about to produce the most powerful person alive. That is an extraordinary thing to publish, and it's exactly the vulnerability Sozin acted on. He didn't need spies or scrying or luck. He needed a calendar and a map, because the system told him in advance. Anyway, since we've come this far back in the timeline, we may as well keep going, all the way back to where bending itself came from, which the franchise answers twice, differently, and never quite reconciles. The dragons taught fire bending, the badger moles taught earth bending, the sky bison taught air bending, and water bending came from watching the moon push and pull the sea. 4 origin stories seeded across 3 seasons of the original show, and each one gets its own moment. Aang and Zuko dance with the last 2 dragons in a genuinely beautiful sequence. The badger moles turn up in the tunnels under Omashu in a story about 2 lovers from warring villages, which is the first proper myth the show tells us. Waterbenders draw their strength from the moon, established in the very first season, load-bearing for the entire North Pole finale. It's coherent. Humans watched animals, humans copied animals, humans got very good at it. Observation and imitation. It fits the show's whole texture. Bending as martial art, as discipline, as something you learn. Then the legend of Korra arrives and says, "No, actually, the lion turtles handed it out." And I want to be fair here, because the beginnings episodes are gorgeous and I like them a great deal, but they do rather rewrite the ground floor. The picture they give us is this. Long before the 4 nations, humans lived on the backs of enormous lion turtles, in cities built on their shells, because the world outside was the spirit wilds, and it was not survivable. When humans went out to hunt, the lion turtle would grant them the ability to bend one element, using energy bending, bending the energy within a person. And when they came home, the lion turtle took it back. Bending wasn't allowed in the cities. So bending is issued like a permit, on loan, withdrawn at the door, which is a completely different thing from learning it off a badger mole. The reconciliation everyone reaches for is that the lion turtles gave humanity the capacity, and the animals taught the technique, capacity and craft. And it works. In the way that these things work, you can get the 2 accounts to sit in the same room, if you're gentle with them. But it requires ignoring how firmly the original framed the animals as originators, not instructors. The badger moles were the first earthbenders. That's the phrasing. Not the first earthbending teachers. The first earthbenders. Honestly though, and I've changed my mind about this over the years, I don't want it reconciled. Because that's what real mythologies look like. Actual cultures do not have one tidy origin story that all the sources agree on. They have four, they contradict, they were written down at different times by people with different agendas. And the contradictions are the interesting part. A world where every scroll agrees is a world where somebody's been editing. So the Avatar setting having two irreconcilable accounts of where bending came from is weirdly one of the more realistic things about it. Fandom has had that particular disagreement logged as an open conflict for well over a decade, and I hope it stays open. Now, energy bending itself, which is the properly strange thing in all this. Because energy bending isn't a fifth element, it's the thing underneath. It predates the four elements, it predates the four nations, it predates the Avatar. It is, by the show's own account, the oldest power in the world. And by Aang's era, almost nobody has heard of it. Not it's rare. Not few can do it. Almost nobody has heard of it. It isn't in any scroll Aang can find. It isn't known to the White Lotus. The sages don't have it. Roku doesn't mention it. None of the past lives bring it up when Aang is desperately asking them all how to beat Ozai without killing him. 10,000 years of avatars, and the oldest and arguably most decisive power in the setting has fallen so completely out of memory that the last person who knows about it is a turtle the size of an island who has spent centuries deliberately avoiding people. That's a proper knowledge collapse, and the show is quite matter-of-fact about it. The lion turtles gave up the role when the Avatar arrived. Their numbers dwindled, and eventually there was one wandering the world with a forest growing on its back. Which brings us to the bit that people describe, not entirely unfairly, as a deus ex machina. Aang cannot kill Ozai. He genuinely cannot. It's against everything he is, and the show has spent 3 seasons establishing that. He asks 4 of his past lives. He gets 4 answers, and none of them help. And then, days before the comet, an island he's washed up on turns out to be alive, and it gives him a power that no living being has heard of, and that power solves his exact problem perfectly. I understand the complaint. I've never fully agreed with it, because the lion turtle is seeded. It's in the background of the library, briefly, in the fortune teller's spirit imagery, and there's a shot of one in Wan Shi Tong's collection. It's not invented on the spot, but I'll grant this much. The solution arrives from outside the system. Everything Aang's world can offer him says kill the man. The answer comes from a thing that predates his world entirely, which is a genuinely odd shape for a story to have. And I think it's why the ending still gets argued about 20 years on. One last thing about energy bending that I find quietly enormous. It's optional. Mastering the 4 elements is compulsory for an avatar. Learning to bend energy is not. It's a bonus. An avatar can technically do it once they've been taught it, and almost none of them ever have, because almost none of them ever knew it was there. So the avatar's most consequential ability, take a person's bending away or give it back, has been sitting inside every single one of them for 10,000 years, unused because nobody wrote it down. There's a third origin mechanism too, which almost nobody counts as one, because it's so woven into the show that it stops looking like a rule. Waterbending comes from the moon, not was inspired by comes from. And we know this because the show demonstrates it in the most direct way available. Zhao kills the moon spirit, and every waterbender in the world loses their bending, instantly, mid-fight, including Katara. That's not how firebending works. You can kill a dragon, and firebenders carry on. You can drive the badger moles underground, and earthbending is fine. But waterbending is plugged into a specific living thing in a pond in the Northern Water Tribe. And if you take a knife to it, the whole art switches off worldwide. Which is a 4th distinct model for how bending works, sitting alongside the animal teachers and the lion turtle permit versions, and it agrees with neither of them. I genuinely can't reconcile that one, and I've stopped trying. It's fantastic television, and it makes no sense in the system. While we're in here, there's a whole category the origin stories simply don't cover, which is the sub-arts. Metal bending, which Toph invents from first principles by noticing that metal is refined earth and still has some earth in it. Lava bending, combustion, blood bending, which Hammer works out under a full moon in a Fire Nation cell, and which is, depending on your reading, either an extension of water bending or a completely separate atrocity that happens to use the same muscles. None of those came from a lion turtle. None of them came from an animal. Every one of them was invented by a person who was paying attention, usually in a very bad situation, which is quietly the most hopeful thing in the setting and possibly the most frightening. The system isn't finished. There are things nobody has thought of yet, and the way you find them is by needing them badly enough. There's also the small matter of the knowledge itself being fragile, which the show demonstrates in the most direct way imaginable. Wan Shu Tong's library holds everything anybody ever collected about anything, and when humans abuse it once, the owl takes the entire thing and sinks it into the desert. Thousands of years of accumulated knowledge gone in a single decision by an irritated spirit. So the two contradictory origin stories aren't necessarily contradictory because somebody made an error. They're contradictory because this is a world where the records keep being destroyed by wars, by spirits, by genocide, by 100 years of silence. Of course the accounts disagree. There's nobody left who was there. One more oddity while we're here, and it's a genuinely lovely one. The lion turtles are described as having elemental affinities. The markings on their shells differ depending on which element they grant. Fire, water, earth, air, each with its own pattern, which means the four nations may not have started as nations at all. They may have started as passengers. Whichever lion turtle your ancestors happened to live on determined which element your entire people could bend forever afterwards, long after the turtles had wandered off and everyone had forgotten why. So the deepest cultural divisions in that world, the ones that produce 100-year war, might trace back to which enormous animal your great-great-grandparents got on. I think that's a beautiful piece of design, and I don't think the show ever says it out loud. You have to assemble it yourself from a couple of shots of shell markings. And speaking of powers that turn up once and then never really get explained, there's the small matter of the Avatar, who simply refused to die. 230. That's the number. That's how long Avatar Kyoshi lived, and she is the oldest confirmed human being in the entire setting, by a very comfortable margin. For scale, King Bumi is 112 when we meet him, and the show treats that as remarkable. He's the mad old man in the throne room who's been alive since before the war properly started, and everybody finds it faintly astonishing. Kyoshi doubled him and then added most of a second Bumi on top, and the explanation isn't the Avatar spirit. That's the first thing that surprised me. You'd assume the fusion with a 10,000-year-old spirit of light comes with some longevity attached, and maybe it does at the margins, but her longevity has a specific and much stranger source. She learned it from a man called Lao Ge, also known as Tie Guai the Immortal, who claimed to have unlocked the secret of not dying and dropped hints about being several thousand years old. He was an assassin, that's the bit. The Avatar's longevity technique comes from a professional murderer who took her on as a disciple during the years she was running with a criminal outfit, before anyone knew who she was. He taught her how to kill people, and he taught her how to stay alive, and by his account, those were the same discipline, keeping order in the body, repairing the damage as it accrues, because aging is just the body falling out of order. So the oldest human in the world got there through a technique she picked up from the underworld, and no Avatar, before or since, seems to have gone looking for it. Now here's where it stops being trivia and starts being a knot. The avatar exists to keep the world in balance. One avatar at a time, and the cycle turns when they die. And the whole design of the thing is rotation. Fire, air, water, earth. Every nation gets a turn. Every era gets a fresh perspective. Kyoshi held the job for the whole of it. That's not a turn, that's an occupation. The cycle stalled for the entire lifespan of everyone who ever met her, and then everyone who met them. Children born the year she became Avatar died of old age, while she was still, comfortably, the Avatar. Roku is born the year Kyoshi dies, that's the handover. 2 and a bit centuries in which the Earth Kingdom, and only the Earth Kingdom, had an Avatar from their own people. Think about what that does to the politics. The Avatar is supposed to be nobody's, and for that entire stretch, the Avatar was very visibly, very physically, a very tall woman from an Earth Kingdom village who founded the Kyoshi warriors and, less happily, founded the Dai Li. And then look at the other end of that same stretch. Kuruk immediately before her dies young, worn out spiritually and physically, fighting things nobody knew he was fighting. Same office, same spirit, same everything, mechanically. One lasts a few decades, the next outlives everyone who ever knew him. So whatever governs how long an avatar lives, it plainly isn't the avatar spirit. It's just people doing what people do at wildly different rates. The human cost of it is what the novels are actually interested in, and it's handled better than I expected from tie-in fiction. She outlives Rangji. She outlives everyone she came up with. She outlives the world she was born into, the villages, the roads, the arguments, the whole texture of the century she understood. There's a version of immortality that's a gift, and there's a version that's just an increasingly long walk with an increasingly empty road behind you. And Kyoshi gets the second one. And she has a daughter late on, Coco, which brings us to the detail that reframes the entire thing, and it's the one that got me. Kyoshi dies of nothing in particular. No battle, no assassin, no spirit, no illness anyone records. She simply stops peacefully at an age she had already demonstrated she could exceed. If the technique is maintenance, if staying alive is an active discipline, something you keep doing, then stopping is a decision. She didn't run out, she put it down. We don't get a reason, we get the number and the absence of an event, and the reader is left to assemble it. The most common reading, and the one I find hard to shake, is that she'd had a daughter and had absolutely no intention of watching that particular funeral. She'd done that arithmetic enough times. I think that's the most affecting piece of lore in the whole franchise, and it's remarkable that it lives in a young adult novel, rather than in either of the shows. A woman who could have gone on indefinitely, choosing a finish line, because being the only fixed point in a world of people you love turns out to be the loneliest job available. There's a smaller irony sitting on top of it that I quite enjoy, in a grim way. Kyoshi's whole reputation is inflexibility. Only justice will bring peace, the fans, the paint, the woman who dropped a peninsula into the sea, rather than negotiate. The avatar who would not bend if you'll forgive it. And the thing she's actually best known for, statistically, is simply how long she lasted, which is arguably the least dramatic form of stubbornness there is, and possibly the most impressive. And she leaves behind the single, funniest, and, on reflection, most disturbing piece of legal precedent in the entire franchise. There's an episode in the second season called Avatar Day, which mostly plays as a comedy. Aang arrives in a town that hates the Avatar, discovers they hold an annual festival where they burn him in effigy, and gets arrested and put on trial. For murder, committed several hundred years before he was born. The charge is the killing of Chin the Conqueror, who died confronting Kyoshi, and the town's position is straightforward. The Avatar did it, you are the Avatar, therefore you did it. Aang's defense is essentially that he doesn't remember, which is not a defense that has ever worked anywhere. And then Kyoshi turns up. She manifests through him, enormous, painted, entirely unbothered, and says, in front of the court, that she killed Qin the Conqueror, flatly, without apology, which is presented as a joke, and it lands as a joke, and I laughed the first 3 times. But look at what's just happened. A legal system in that world holds that the avatar is one continuous legal person across incarnations, liable for acts committed by a previous body 400 years earlier. And the show, rather than dismissing that as village nonsense, produces the previous body to give evidence. And she confesses. So the question we open this whole thing with is, the avatar one person or a series of people? Turns out to have a jurisdiction with an answer. It's one person. Ask the courts of Qin village. Which means, if you take it seriously for a moment, that every avatar inherits a liability as well as an office. Every debt, every grudge, every unresolved atrocity going back 10,000 years, theoretically, belongs to whoever's currently holding the job. There's no statute of limitations that survives reincarnation. Aang gets off, incidentally, on a technicality. Qin's death is ruled an accident, since Kyoshi separated the peninsula from the mainland, and Qin refused to move. Aang points this out instead, with what I can only describe as an extremely dry explanation. I do love that. The oldest human in the world turning up at a small-town trial to establish that, technically, it was the ground's fault. One more small thing about her, because it's the sort of detail that stays with you. Kyoshi was enormously tall, not slightly, towering by the standards of everyone around her, and the novels make it a genuine, practical fact of her life, rather than a design flourish, clothes that don't fit, doorways she has to think about, a physical presence that terrifies people before she's opened her mouth. She never learned to make herself smaller, socially or otherwise, and by the end, I imagine she'd stopped considering it. Anyway, she does come back, in the way all of them do, which is its own peculiar arrangement when you think about it. A job where your predecessors are available for consultation and occasionally disagree with each other. Aang sits down to meditate, and Roku appears and gives him guidance. Depending on how you came down on that first section, Aang is either receiving counsel from a wise elder, or he is talking to himself, and the show plays it entirely straight either way, which is very funny once you notice. The arrangement, as canon presents it, is that past avatars remain available. Not in a vague inspirational sense, actually available, as conversation partners, if you can get spiritually quiet enough to reach them. Roku for Aang, Aang for Korra, Kyoshi and Yang Chen, and Kuruk on request, if the matter's serious. Which is an extraordinary professional perk when you lay it out flat. Every avatar in history is, in effect, mentored by their own accumulated experience. Nobody else in that world gets that. Zuko has to work out how to be Fire Lord with an uncle and a lot of anxiety. Korra can ask a man who did a version of the job for 66 years. But look at what happens when they actually use it. The clearest case is Aang, in the final stretch of the original series, going to 4 past lives about Ozai. He needs another way. He asks Roku, who tells him he should have been more decisive, that his own failure to act against Sozin let everything happen, so be decisive. He asks Kyoshi, who says flatly that she would have done whatever it took to stop Qin the Conqueror, and that only justice brings peace. He asks Kuruk, who tells him to actively shape his own destiny, having spent his life being passive and losing everything for it. And he asks Yang Chen. Yang Chen is the one that matters. She's an air nomad. She's the one incarnation who shares Aang's exact religious training, his exact philosophy, his exact horror of taking a life. Aang goes to her expecting to finally be told what he wants to hear, and she tells him that air nomad philosophy doesn't apply to him, that the monks detach themselves from the world in order to attain spiritual enlightenment, and the avatar cannot do that, because the avatar's whole job is attachment to the world. She says that many great and wise air nomads have detached themselves and achieved enlightenment. But the avatar can never do it, because his sole duty is to the world. Selfless duty, she says. You must sacrifice your own spiritual needs. It is the sharpest scene in the entire show, and I don't think it gets quoted a tenth as often as it deserves. A woman from his own tradition, whose entire life was built on the thing he's clinging to, telling a 12-year-old that his religion is a luxury he doesn't get. And here's the loop tightening. All four of them agree. Different reasoning, 4 different lives, one conclusion. If the past lives are a committee, that's a unanimous vote. And if they're all him, then it's worse. It means every version of himself that has ever existed says do it, and he still says no. So what does the show do with a unanimous verdict from 10,000 years of experience? It has him ignore it completely. And the answer he ends up using arrives, as we've said, from a source older than the entire system, which tells you something quite specific about how this advice loop actually works. The past lives are only reliable about the past. They are, by construction, always one generation out of date. And every genuinely new problem is one the committee has never seen. Korra's version of this is the same shape reflected in a mirror, and it's a bit sadder. She's mentored by Aang, and Aang's advice keeps landing slightly wrong, not because it's bad advice, but because it's advice for a world that doesn't exist anymore. He solved a 100-year war. She's dealing with a class uprising in an industrial city, a civil war in her own tribe, an anarchist reading group with terrifying competence, and eventually a military dictatorship. None of that has a precedent in his file. There's a moment in her first season where she can't reach him at all, and it nearly finishes her, and the show is quite clear that the reason she finally does reach him is that she's hit the bottom, which is a genuinely good bit of writing, because it means the mentorship isn't a hotline. It's something you can only use when you're least able to think straight. And then there's the question I can't get past, which is, what is it like from their side? Because if Roku is in some sense a continuing person, then he has spent well over a century as a consultant. He watches, he can't act. He knows what's coming and can only occasionally get a message through, and only when the current one goes and sits quietly on a rock about it. Roku's own arc is a story about a man who failed to act in time, and his afterlife, if we're calling it that, consists of being permanently unable to act, forever, while watching the consequences. I don't think anyone in the writer's room sat down and designed that as a punishment, but it does land like one more oddity, and then we'll move on, because it's the kind of thing that's fun to lie there and turn over. The advice loop only runs one direction, past to present. There is no mechanism by which an avatar can send anything forward, no way to leave a note, no way to warn the next one about a specific thing, nothing except being available later if they happen to ask. So the accumulated wisdom of 10,000 years is entirely pull, never push. Every avatar has to already suspect the answer exists before they can go and get it, which means the system is not entirely dependent on the current avatar knowing what to ask. And the current avatar is, almost by definition, the person with the least context in the room. Then there's the other direction, which is that the past lives can simply be wrong. Kuruk's advice to Aang is to actively shape his own destiny, perfectly sensible on its face. It's also, transparently, a man giving the opposite of the advice he followed, because his own passivity ruined his life and cost him everything he loved. He isn't offering wisdom, he's offering a regret with a label filed off. Roku's is the same shape. Be decisive, because I wasn't, and look what happened. Kyoshi's is a woman defending a decision she has clearly spent a very long time defending. So the accumulated wisdom of 10,000 years isn't wisdom exactly. A lot of it is people telling the next person not to make the specific mistake they made, which is famously the least useful category of advice there is. Nobody's mistake is available for reuse. There's a lovely small proof of this in Korra's first season. When she finally reaches Aang, He doesn't tell her anything. He doesn't explain a technique or reveal a secret. He restores her bending, which is a thing he can do because of a power he got from a lion turtle. And he does it without a word of guidance about how to actually be the avatar in a city with electric lights and a stock exchange. And that's essentially the last substantial thing she gets from him. I've often wondered what the arrangement feels like from the far end of it too, because the show does drop one strange detail about how much of a past avatar persists. Roku's dragon, Fang, is still around. Iroh sees him. He's a separate creature with his own continued existence in the spirit world, not a memory and not a projection. So it isn't only the avatars who hang about. There's a whole population back there, apparently, going about its business, and the only person who ever gets to visit is the one doing the job. And that, as it turns out, is a very fragile way to store 10,000 years of anything, because it all runs through one connection, which is, I'd argue, the single greatest structural vulnerability in the entire 10,000 year design. Not the avatar state, not the fixed elemental order. The fact that all accumulated experience is stored in one place, accessible by one method, through one spirit, with no backup and no written copy. Any sensible institution would have kept notes. And there's a quiet asymmetry in who actually gets consulted, which I only noticed on a rewatch. It's nearly always the recent ones. Roku for Aang, Aang for Korra, occasionally Kyoshi because she's famous and dramatic. The further back you go, the vaguer it gets. Nobody in either series has a proper conversation with an avatar from 4,000 years ago. They're theoretically all in there. Practically, the accessible range seems to be about 4 or 5 incarnations deep before it turns into fog, which makes sense if you think of it as memory rather than an archive. Recent things are vivid. Distant things are impressions. But it does mean the 10,000 years of wisdom the avatar supposedly carries is, in usable terms, more like 300. Everything before that is present the way your ancestors are present. Real, definitely, there, entirely unreachable for the purposes of asking a question. And partway through Korra, that connection is severed. The shot is about 30 seconds long, and they play it almost without music. Every past avatar dissolving. Korra sees them go, one after another, backwards down the line. Aang, Roku, Kyoshi, Kuruk, Yang Chen. Faces she's spoken to, and faces she's never seen. All the way back to one, coming apart like ash. Still the most upsetting thing in either series, and I've never quite recovered from how quietly it's staged. What's happening mechanically? It's the harmonic convergence of 171 AG. Unalaq has merged with Vaatu to become the Dark Avatar, and in the fight, he manages to pull Rava out of Korra's body. Separated from her host, she's exposed, that same exposure problem we've already covered, and he destroys her, and with her goes the connection to every avatar who has ever lived. Rava does come back. She reforms, and Korra re-merges with her after energy bending Unavaatu, and the avatar spirit is restored. What doesn't come back is the line, Korra can't reach her past lives, then or ever again. That's permanent, and the show sticks to it for 2 more seasons, which puts Korra in a genuinely peculiar position. She's the last avatar of one cycle, and the first avatar of a new one, at the same time, in the same body, with no break in between. Both statements are true. The show is entirely comfortable with that and moves on. Now the mechanical puzzle, because there's a real one, and it isn't the emotional stuff. Rava was carrying 2 things, the connection to the past lives, and according to how the fusion is described, the accumulated ability to bend all 4 elements. That's why one could suddenly bend everything after the merge, when previously he could only bend one at a time. So Rava is destroyed. Korra loses the past lives. Why does she keep the bending? She airbends afterwards. She earthbends, firebends, waterbends, does all of it, straight through the next 2 seasons. If the spirit was the vessel for both, losing the spirit should have taken both, and she should have come out of that convergence as a waterbender with a very sad expression. The best answer fandom has produced is the hard drive metaphor. The data was still on the disk. What got destroyed was the index. The files exist, you just can't find them anymore. Which is a decent way to hold two contradictory outcomes in one hand. And it is also, let's be honest, a metaphor rather than an explanation. It describes the result without touching the mechanism. Then there's the second puzzle, which nobody in the show acknowledges at all, and it's the one I actually think is unanswerable. Beginnings establishes a very specific rule about Rava and Vatu. Neither can permanently destroy the other. If Rava wins, whatever small darkness remains inside her grows over 10,000 years until Vatu bursts back out. If Vatu wins, the same happens in reverse. That's the whole reason the pair of them have been fighting since before there were people. It's not a war anyone can win, it's a rhythm, which means the standard mechanism for Rava returning is that she regrows inside Vatu, slowly, over a very long time. That is not what happens. She's destroyed in the open, outside him, and she reforms within minutes. So either that's a different mechanism entirely, and nobody mentions it, or the rule has an exception that's never stated, and I've looked. There isn't a line anywhere that patches it. It's just left there. Which I've made my peace with mostly because the show is very clearly interested in something else in that finale. Because the argument the writers are actually making is that Korra's power was never in the past lives to begin with. That's the whole Tree of Time sequence. Tenzin tells her to connect with her own spirit rather than her predecessors. She meditates, taps into what the show calls the energy of the universe, and projects herself as something enormous and blue over Republic City, with no Rava in her, no past lives, no avatar state in the usual sense, just her. And thematically that's right, it's the correct ending for that character. Korra's entire problem across 2 seasons is that she keeps trying to be the avatar rather than being herself doing the job, and the finale strips away every borrowed thing and shows there's still someone standing there. It's just metaphysically messy as anything. You've built a 10,000-year system and then demonstrated in the finale that a sufficiently determined person can do the big cosmic bit without it. The consequence, though, is enormous and permanent, and this is the part I think the franchise deserves real credit for. Everything before Korra is now unreachable. Not destroyed. The past avatars presumably still exist somewhere. Their history still happened. The world they made is still the world. But as a resource, as something the current avatar can pick up the phone to, 10,000 years is simply gone. One's experience, gone. Kyoshi's 2.5 centuries of hard-won political horror, gone. Aang's 53 years of trying to rebuild 4 nations, gone. Every avatar from Korra onwards is starting with a blank index. That's a bold thing to do to your own franchise. Most series would have found a way to walk it back. A comic, a special, a quiet retcon where she reconnects. They didn't. Korra spends the rest of her run alone in a way no avatar before her has been, and the next avatar, whoever they are, inherits that silence, which is either a tragedy or a fresh start depending entirely on your mood, and I suspect the show would say it's both. There's a detail in that finale I don't want to skip past because it undercuts the whole architecture in a way I'm not sure the writers intended. The person who saves the situation isn't just the avatar, it's Jinora and Korra, a 10-year-old airbender, Aang's granddaughter, with no Rava, no cycle, no 10,000 years of anything. She's the one who finds the residual light inside the dark avatar and helps bring it back out. Korra can do it. Korra is at that point spiritually bankrupt, in the literal sense. Jinora just goes and does it, because she happens to be unusually gifted at the spirit side of things, in a way nobody in her family can properly explain. which raises an obvious question that the show never asks. If a 10-year-old with no avatar connection can do the single most important piece of spirit work in 10 millennia, what exactly is the avatar for spiritually? The bridge between worlds, we're told, except there's a child standing on the same bridge without a ticket. The most generous reading is that harmonic convergence had raised spiritual energy so high that things ordinarily impossible were briefly available to anyone attuned enough. That's fair. It's also the sort of explanation you construct afterwards, rather than one the story provides. And then there's Vaatu, who I think a lot of people forget about entirely. He isn't gone. He can't be. That's the rule. The two of them regrow inside each other, forever, and Korra dispersing the dark avatar spirit doesn't change the underlying arrangement. Which means Vaatu is currently, somewhere, very slowly reforming inside Rava, and by the terms established in Beginnings, he'll be back for the next convergence. That's in roughly 10,000 years, admittedly. Not an urgent scheduling problem, but it does mean the entire conflict of Korra's second season was a single beat in a rhythm that has been going since before there were people and will carry on long after there's anyone left to notice, which is either bleak or comforting. I flip between the two depending on the hour. It's also worth saying plainly what it costs her personally, because the severance isn't the end of Korra's bad run, it's the start of it. What follows is a poisoning, a physical collapse, nearly 6 months of not being able to walk properly, and a long stretch of being unable to do the job at all while the world carries on needing one. An avatar with no past lives, no functioning body, and no confidence, watching a military dictatorship consolidate. The franchise had never done that before. Aang's low points last an episode, Korra's lasts most of a season, and the recovery is unglamorous and slow, and involves a great deal of sitting in a wheelchair, being furious. I think it's the best thing that series did, and I think it's why their arguments about it have softened so much over the years. There's a question hanging over the new cycle too, that nobody can answer yet. If Korra is the first avatar of a fresh line, then whoever comes after her presumably connects back to Korra, and to nobody before her, which means the next avatar's entire accessible history is one woman's lifetime. Not 10,000 years, one, and that's a completely different job. Every previous avatar could, in principle, reach back into a very deep well. The next one has a puddle, unless the connection restores itself somehow, which the show never promises and never rules out. Or unless the old line is still reachable by some other route entirely, which fans have argued for years, and which has the distinct feel of wishful thinking wearing a lab coat. But it does raise the question the whole franchise has been quietly built on since the first episode. What is any of this actually for? Here's the job description, in full. Keep the world in balance. That's it. That's the whole brief. Nobody defines it, nobody sets targets, there's no review process, and no retirement age. 4 nations hand you the largest responsibility in existence, and the specification fits on a fortune cookie. And underneath it sits the contradiction the entire franchise is built on, which is so obvious that I think it becomes invisible. The avatar exists to maintain balance, and the avatar is by construction the single largest concentration of power in the world. The thing on the scale to keep it level is heavier than everything else on the scale. You can see how uncomfortable that is if you look at how people react to it. Fong wants to use the avatar as ordnance. Eamon builds an entire movement on the argument that concentrated bending power is inherently unjust, and the most concentrated bending power in the world is standing right there in a ponytail, which makes her an extremely awkward counter-argument. The Red Lotus go further and say the answer is to end the cycle altogether, that the avatar is not the solution to imbalance, but its most durable cause. They're villains. They're also, and the show knows this, not making a stupid argument. But the version of this I find most interesting isn't philosophical. It's just the record. Every avatar's solution becomes the next avatar's problem. And I mean that quite literally. in a chain you can follow across 10,000 years. One closes the spirit portals. He does it to protect humanity, and it works. It also produces 10,000 years of humans and spirits being total strangers to each other, which becomes the exact crisis Korra inherits. Kyoshi founds the Dai Li to protect the cultural heritage of Ba Sing Se. Reasonable. Within a few centuries, they are a secret police force running a psychological control operation on an entire city, and the phrase, "There is no war in Ba Sing Se," is the single most frightening thing in the original series. That's Kyoshi's institution. She built it. Aang co-founds Republic City with Fire Lord Zuko. It is the best idea anyone in that world has ever had. A city where the nations live together. Physical proof that the war didn't have to define everything. The thing he spent his whole adult life building. Give it one generation, and it's a place with organised crime, a bending underclass, and a masked man taking people's bending away in front of enormous crowds who agree with him. And Korra reopens the portals. She makes a deliberate choice at the end of that convergence to leave both of them open and let the two worlds mix, because she's decided the separation was the original error. Which brings us to now. Because the next series in this franchise, Avatar 7 Havens, arrives on the 9th of October this year. 26 episodes across 2 books, and the premise is this. The world has been shattered by a cataclysm. What's left of humanity survives in 7 strongholds. A young earthbender called Pavi discovers she's the Avatar after Korra, and in that era, the title marks her as humanity's destroyer rather than its saviour. She's hunted by humans and by spirits. They're making the paradox the plot. That's a properly bold move for a franchise this beloved, and I'll be honest, I didn't expect it. For 20 years, the tension between the Avatar keeps balance and the Avatar is the largest imbalance going has been subtext, argued about by villains, and never quite conceded by the story. Now it's the logline. I want to be careful not to turn this into a list of blunders though, because that would be an unfair reading, and I don't believe it. Every single one of those decisions was defensible with the information available at the time. One closed the portals because people were being killed. Kyoshi built the Dai Li because a culture was under threat. Aang built a city because he'd just watched 4 nations tear each other apart for a century and wanted somewhere they could live. Korra opened the portals because she'd seen what the separation cost. None of them were wrong. That's the point. That's actually the point. Because what the pattern demonstrates isn't incompetence. It's that the job has no terminal state. Balance isn't a condition you achieve and then maintain like a tidy room. It's a direction you have to keep walking in, and every step changes the terrain, and the changed terrain is what the next person has to walk across. There's no version of the Avatar's job where you finish. There's only the version where you hand it on, which, if you step back far enough, is why the reincarnation thing makes sense as a design at all. You don't need an immortal being to fix the world. You need a series of mortal ones, each of whom gets it wrong differently, because the alternative, one entity with one perspective, forever, would have calcified about 9,000 years ago. The cycle isn't a way of preserving the answer, it's a way of making sure nobody keeps it too long. And that's where I land on all of this, honestly. None of these knots resolve, not one. The identity question doesn't resolve. The 2 origins of bending don't resolve. The Avatar state's design flaw doesn't get fixed. Korra never gets her past lives back. And the balance problem is about to become somebody else's nightmare in October. Which is exactly right. A mythology that answers itself completely stops being a mythology and becomes a manual. The reason people are still arguing about a children's cartoon 2 decades on is that it left the good bits open. There's one more version of the balance problem I want to leave you with, because it's the one the expanded material is most interested in, and it's the least discussed. The Yang Chen novels, and I'll say again, almost nobody talks about these, take the position that the Avatar's real work is not fighting. It's negotiation, favours, leverage, and a certain amount of quiet moral compromise, conducted well out of public view. Yang Chen is remembered by everyone in the franchise as the greatest avatar there's been. Serene, wise, spiritually unmatched, the standard everyone else is measured against. And the books show you the machinery underneath that reputation, and it involves a great deal of doing slightly grubby things to slightly bad people in order to keep something worse from happening, which reframes her advice to Aang considerably. When she tells him he has to sacrifice his own spiritual needs, she isn't speaking theoretically, she's describing a career, and it lands on the same contradiction from a different side. The Avatar cannot be neutral, because neutrality in a dispute between four unequal powers is just a vote for whoever's currently winning. So the Avatar takes sides, constantly, in small ways, while carrying a title that says they belong to everyone. Balance turns out not to mean impartiality at all. It means putting your thumb on the scale, over and over, in whichever direction keeps the thing level this week, which is a much less comfortable job description than the one on the tin, and I suspect it's the honest one. There's a version of all this that I think is worth stating plainly, because it's easy to lose in the individual puzzles. The Avatar is a monarchy with extra steps, an unelected individual identified in childhood by an unaccountable religious process, granted overwhelming power, answerable to nobody, expected to arbitrate between nations that had no say in the selection. The only check on the whole arrangement is that they eventually die, and even that produces a replacement chosen by the same opaque mechanism. Korra's villains are, more or less in sequence, an egalitarian, a spiritualist, an anarchist, and an autocrat, and 3 of the 4 are making some version of that observation. The show gives each of them a real argument, and then correctly has them behave appallingly, which is the honest way to handle it. The argument being sound doesn't make the movement good, but it never actually rebuts the point, not once, in either series. The best answer the franchise offers is that the individuals holding the office have generally been decent, which is not a system, it's a run of luck. And now a series is arriving where that luck appears to have run out. One final thought on the shape of the whole thing. 20 years of this now, from a cartoon on Nickelodeon in 2005, to a franchise with 2 full series, 6 novels, a stack of comics, a live-action adaptation, an animated film this summer, and a 3rd series arriving in October. That's an unusual survival rate for anything, let alone something originally aimed at children. And I don't think it survived on the fights, good as they are. I think it survived because the questions underneath it were left genuinely open. And open questions are the only thing anybody comes back to. Nobody rewatches a story to find out what happens. They rewatch it to have another go at the bit they never settled. So that's the set. If you asked me which ones actually keep me up, it wouldn't be the cosmic ones. It's always the small mechanical details. It's the fact that nobody in that world ever seems to sit down and argue about whether the Avatar is 1 soul or 100. It's a box of toys on a table doing the work of an entire theology. It's an ability older than the 4 nations that fell so completely out of memory that the last thing alive who remembered it was avoiding people on purpose. And it's Kyoshi still. 2 centuries of showing up, and then a quiet decision to stop, with no scene attached and no explanation offered. There's a new one coming in October, which means a new set of these before long. Pavi's era looks like it's going to break things the franchise has never broken before, and I'd be very surprised if we don't end up doing another one of these in a year or so, with an entirely fresh pile of contradictions to sort through. I've also got half an eye on the novels, which is where a lot of the genuinely strange lore lives, the Kyoshi books especially, and the Yang Chen ones, which almost nobody talks about, and probably should. That might be its own night, but that's plenty